Now I know I've got to make her blogs. I've got to make her blogs. I can't believe June is already done. I swear to God, this month really passed by extremely quickly. Maybe just because doing the two themed months in a row made this one seem very quick in comparison. I'm not really sure, but yeah, already end of the month. My God, Anime Expo is coming up this weekend. I'm going to be there. Nothing major going on really, but that aside. So I wanted to end this month with something that I'll go ahead and say I hope that a lot of people hear this one because I think this is actually a very important topic that I think should be talked about. And, obviously this is just going to be filled with my own experiences and opinions, but I don't know. I don't know how often it's something that people cognitively think of, at least in like a critical kind of way. But anyway, so this was something I've been thinking about, I think, for a little while, but relevantly it came up as a suggestion from a commenter who said something and suggested this on the first Kirblog I did this month, I believe, which was about your taste in media. So this is kind of an interesting sort of bookend the month as a sequel to that one. This comes from Darth Zemnis, and he asked, have you ever felt a fan base has soured your taste for a show or even completely ruined any interest in a show? So I'll start off with, this one's gonna start relatively slow and a little bit more like lighthearted, I guess you could say, because it's just kind of like whatever. It's gonna get a little bit more serious later on. And I'll also say ahead of time, I'm mostly, for the early part, I'm mostly gonna be using anime as my example to use. But I think that this also, for the most part, applies to like just most media in general. But yeah, I'll start things off with this. So I've now said I'm going to start this off like 5 times. Good. Anyway, here we go. Yeah. So most of my experiences, I'll say, with fandoms in general, have actually been pretty positive. I think that the reason is, in terms of my enveloping myself in a fandom, the ones I tend to gravitate towards and surround myself with are the ones that I have found to be a bit more mature, and typically those are sects within a fandom. Obviously something like Dragon Ball Z is, I think that when most people think of Dragon Ball Z fans, I would be presumptuous and say they probably think of people who are just like, measuring power levels and are very young kids and etc. Now, granted that, the presence of the show in the US has changed a lot with like Kai airing on Nicktoons and everything. So I don't know what the younger DBZ fans are like. I'm not really sure. I would go ahead and assume that, maybe, they have a lot more information and access to, correct information now compared to back in the day. But I digress. My experience with Dragon Ball fandom is mostly, obviously between my real life friends that grew up with the show with me. But in terms of like the internet, it's mostly been through the Kanzenshu message board, which those of you who don't know is the website that Mike Labrie, Vegito EX, who has joined me on all of the Dragon Ball Super Kirblog, that's the forum that he runs, and with a few of his friends and stuff. And generally, everybody on there is pretty like mature in terms of their, still with opinions and everything. It's not like everybody's like, a robot or whatever. But although it's funny because, there's often a joke made about what, there's a giant page of rules that you need to read before you sign up for the forum because it's how they expect you to act. But I think that part of that is the reason why most of the, I don't even want to say integrity, but I guess you could say that, but more so just the general maturity level of the people on that forum is kept to a certain level so that there's not much, bullshit that happens, I guess you could say. On the opposite side, though, I've had my annoying share of fandoms too. Probably the most prominent and notorious for me for, I guess, maybe only a couple years at best, but was Fullmetal Alchemist. This was the time that I was beginning to go to a lot more anime conventions, and this was when FMA had basically taken over the world in terms of its popularity. I was running into a lot of very, very, very outwardly, aggressively passionate kind of fans that really kind of like made me be like, whoa, okay, this is a little weird. And, it was a level of obsession that I think I'd never quite seen before, even with like, because I'd been big into Dragon Ball for like a long time by that point, but The extent that I saw, the really hardcore Full Metal Alchemist fans, it was definitely kind of eye-opening, and I admit for a while I think it made me kind of step away for a bit, but at the same time it was not enough to stop me from enjoying the show itself, the main part of it, which was the media that we were all, a fan of in the first place, which is the show, or the manga, or the video games, or etc. I mean, mostly it was the show that people were into. Not to discredit the original manga at all, of course. But on that same note, too, when Brotherhood came out, shortly after FMA kind of the first anime series finished on American television, by the time the Brotherhood came out, I was still, regardless of my negative experiences with people or whatever, which were not, anything earth-shattering or whatever. I'm going to get more into that level of like really crazy stuff later, but it wasn't enough to stop me from being interested in seeing Brotherhood, and I followed it. And I was watching it as the Japanese episodes were coming out, because Funimation was beginning to stream legal subtitle episodes of shows as they were coming out in Japan. And the dub I waited on because it had been so soon since I watched it in Japanese. And so I wanted to just kind of give it a while. And then I went back and recently rewatched it. That was back when I did the FMA Kirblog that I did, I think like maybe 2 years ago by this point. I don't even know, whatever. Either way. So kind of around the same time, too, speaking of when Brotherhood was hitting, I was starting to meet a lot more people in college who I was getting that kind of explanation of. They were getting turned off from shows. Now, when it comes to anime, this is kind of where, this is different when it's compared to other media. In the case of anime, it's kind of like presence in the U.S. has changed a lot in terms of like accessibility and just, its relation to the mainstream, I guess you could say. But a lot of people I were meeting who, were illegally watching shows as they were coming out in Japan, and subtitle, groups or whatever were putting them out, and, on like, BitTorrent or whatever. And, when shows would come out in the US, they would get very annoyed. And I'm not just talking like, they ruined the dub, like if it was something that was censored, like on Cartoon Network or whatever. That's like a whole other subject in and of itself. But I'm more talking like just the presence of it being more known by people in general. And maybe even like, I guess the extra sting was, and it's the English version, whether it was something censored for TV or just in the US in general or whatever. Because I think even there were people that were aggravated about when, speaking of FMA earlier, when that came to the US and when that was on Cartoon Network, pretty much, there were a couple minor bits, but it was mostly uncensored when it played on Adult Swim. But I was meeting people who had that kind of mentality, and I didn't get it when they were like, it's ruined for me now because now everybody likes it. And granted, that's a type of snobbery that comes with like, this was mine. This was precious to me, and it was my cool little thing that I enjoyed to myself, with my friends or whatever that knew about it. And that's kind of part of like, I guess the, I don't like to throw this word around, but I guess the more elitist side of anime culture in general, not just anime fandom, but just anime fans overall, of just people that were watching these mysterious like adult foreign animated shows or whatever, like, and now that I think kind of like novelty side is worn off, because and which is a good thing, because now that anime is more kind of generally accepted into American culture overall, from the kind of twofold strike of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And the presence of like Speed Racer and stuff like that beforehand. So now that's kind of changed, and also now the fact that like shows are becoming, legally readily available from companies, in Japanese, and they're broadcast dubs and stuff like that. So the way that people enjoy that stuff, I think, has shifted very much. And kind of skipping to how things are today. The other thing is that social media, in tandem with the way that shows have become immediately available through like streaming services and still piracy. It's better or worse. Unfortunately, it's still a thing. There is no better. It's just worse. Sorry. But it's changed everybody's accessibility to the media, and also social media has made it easier for people to share their thoughts. Because it's all out in the open for people to consume, and and do whatever kind of personal expression of that. Consumerism, I get, they don't think of it that way. They think of it as fandom. But yeah, and like, I guess for myself, on a smaller scale, admittedly, yes, there have been cases where shows, games, movies, whatever, that I haven't seen yet being constantly thrown in my face and like, made into like image memes every other day and like, quoted by people and screen capped and sometimes even spoiled. Yes, it's annoying. I'm not going to deny that. I think it's just within human nature that when you're presented with that, you can't help but be aggravated by that. It's going to happen. And there's nothing necessarily you can do, and I'm going to come back to this later, but there's nothing that you can do to change that happening. You can only change the way that you react. That's kind of the overall theme, and I'm going to get more in depth with that a little bit later. From my own perspective, I was saying this earlier too, but like I said, I have very few fandoms that I like envelop myself in. And one could argue my bit about the Dragon Ball fandom and that particular sect with the Kanzenshu forum is maybe even the only fandom that I envelop myself in that way. I just have that kind of like, fixation on that franchise. And, I am a fan of many, many, many things, as everybody knows from, the many, many Kirblog topics that I've done about various shows, movies, games, comics, etc. But I also try to temper my obsessions with stuff because the truth of the matter is I have a very obsessive kind of personality. In just this last month alone, dictated by the topics that I've, been going into, stuff that's on my plate that I'm very, very into right now are Undertale and Young Justice. Undertale, I've been recommending to many friends. I went as far as to make a whole cartoon about it, obviously. And, Young Justice, I had been, sitting on for a while, like much longer than I'd been waiting to play Undertale finally. And, that type of stuff is already very up my alley to begin with in terms of the genre and everything. And, and then with also just knowing about this whole thing with, giving a chance for it to come back with a new season and the interview with Greg Weisman that I did recently and talking about that and all that. But that said, so on that same note, sure, I will probably, because it's fresh in my mind, as with just pop culture stuff in general, I'm going to talk about it to my friends and, and I'll bring up like, oh, I just finally watched through Young Justice. Oh, I finally just played through Undertale. Oh, have you played Undertale yet? You should totally try it if you haven't. I think you would like it if, based on the context and the appropriateness or whatever. But at the same time, and then the same thing applies with the Young Justice stuff as well. But the point of that is like, I'm not going to only be talking about that with all of my friends, like whatever it is that I am currently into. That's not the only subject that's going to go on for, however length of time that's the thing that I'm into right now, etc. Because doing that, knowing that, okay, this is, as I was saying before, it's human nature to be frustrated and annoyed with that kind of stuff. So my knowing that, I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to do that. And especially because, like I was saying, I have an obsessive personality, especially when I was a kid and I wasn't like, being productive. I wasn't creating stuff. I was creating stuff, but I wasn't like, making media myself, which I'll also get into that very soon. I just played video games and watched cartoons. And that was that was my life, was just that. And talking about it and sharing those experiences with my friends and, in the meantime, making my own stuff inspired from those things. But that was my life and that was just my obsession. And it's still my obsession in a way, especially because in my case, it has to do with my line of work in that, I make cartoons and I want to work in the animation industry and games and movies, and creative entertainment media shit in general. That's where that comes from, of course. But in terms of like my social life, there's a line that you have to draw, and there's also just kind of like social cues that you have to sort of take to where it's not going to go overboard and alienate the people that you're surrounded by if that's all that defines you as a human being. Now, sadly, one of the other, going a bit further than this, one of the biggest differences today is, and I think it's as a result of, again, just how social media has evolved. It's now how much more often, at least in terms of the stuff that I see happen, like unfold before my eyes, in terms of really bad experiences in fandoms. Now I don't want to get too, this is the more serious section. I don't want to get too heavy-handed, but I'm going to reference something specific here. I have a friend who, unfortunately, now is so soured by a certain pretty major controversy that happened with a Steven Universe fan on Tumblr that now they have little to no interest in ever giving the show a fair shot because they were so disgusted with how the fandom of that show, or, as I'm going to get more specific now, that particular sect of that show's fandom handled that particular situation. And that's really a shame, because the other sad truth is, although there are many different kinds of fans with different levels of interest and ways of expressing it, when a bad part of a fandom, not the whole thing, just a part of a fandom pulls a stunt like that, it makes everyone look bad, especially to people on the outside. And the thing is, I think that in some way, that even goes back to why, nerds are picked on in the first place, for being annoying or awkward and acting up over something a larger general group of people doesn't understand. And those situations that happen, especially ones that are very extreme like this, make them further not want to understand. When I had Kaiser Neko and Zach Holzman on for talking about what's it like to be a furry and what it's like to go to furry conventions, I had them in the first place kind of alleviating a lot of, unfortunately negative perceptions that people, unfairly, I think, have on furries, on not just fandom, but just furries as like people who define themselves that way. And unfortunately that has a lot to do with, we referenced the CSI episode or whatever it was, where that was all just like, kind of making them out to be like, oh, creepy, like animal fuckers or whatever, that kind of thing. And, and that's probably, that whole entire episode probably came as a result of somebody who worked on the show or otherwise, by secondhand kind of, experiences maybe even, or first, I don't know. But the fact is, it came from somebody having a bad experience with a particular group of people. I'm not even talking about just fandom, because this, in a way, this is kind of the more serious part of it. It can come from any group of people. I'm not just talking about fandom now, where somebody has a bad experience and it's like, I'm going to express my bad experience with this group of people in the form of media to make other people who watch this, who consume this and are going to experience this. This is the opinion that I'm gonna, put out to them. And hopefully people are smart enough to make their own interpretation of it, and they're not necessarily just gonna, go off of that 100%. But unfortunately, that happens too. That's often how people are. They just, because people just kind of, they like whatever they like, and they can't always necessarily explain it. They're just entertained by what they're entertained. Sometimes they can. But entertainment is just like you're just. I keep going back to the word consuming, but that's really, I think, where it comes from, because you're watching, you're playing, you're reading, you're experiencing, and it's just having whatever impact it has on you. Kind of going off of the note about how people they take those experiences and put them in there, and that's how they express their opinions. That's kind of like looping around, like that comes from a type of fandom. I'm expressing this opinion about fandom, and now this fandom is going to take that and spread this around, etc. And this becomes a whole negative thing that affects all these different kinds of people. It makes me feel, as a person who is a creator and is a public figure, and to whatever extent I am, I feel extremely blessed right now, because I have not had any major incidents or anything like that happening with fans of Tome. Tome in particular, because and most likely it's because the amount of fans that I had, and this is not to be insulting or to whine at all. I'm very happy about this. I'm very appreciative of the smaller amount of people that are into and appreciate what it is that I do. And I think because of the fact that it is a relatively small amount of fans, I'm more easily able to keep track of them. Whether it's over YouTube comments or on the Facebook page or over Twitter or the Tumblr tag, etc. It's very manageable for me to, interact with those people directly. And, of course, I try to be as positive of, a person who is servicing them with what it is that I create and how I interact with them and, what I can do for them, etc. And what, in some cases, what they do for me, like with the crowdfunding campaign, etc. And because of the fact that it's a small group of people, like it's like I said, it's easier for me to keep track of. On that same note, and this is very important, and anybody with half a brain knows this, but it's still worth repeating. You cannot control what people do. And on that note, if a fandom grows to an amazing size, that's the more proof of, whatever the fandom sprouted from, whatever media it is. It's the proof of that thing's success. And hopefully it means that it's very deserving of the amount of fanfare that it has. But the more difficult, that makes it more difficult to keep track of it for the people that, created or are overseeing it or whatever, depending on whatever the medium is, so on and so forth. And that goes back to my other topic I did a while back, I think it was a few months ago now, about responsibility as a creator. This is a little bit off topic, but I think still worth bringing up. And I'm not going to name names in this particular bit right here because I don't want to cause any issue, but still worth mentioning. When a public figure influences people to go around acting like assholes because they themselves either act like or maybe flat out are an asshole, then that makes both them and their fans look just as awful. I knew some people, and I still see this today, unfortunately, with some of the newer, YouTube folks, and it might very well have come from a previous generation that taught them to it's okay to do this or whatever, which is really unfortunate. But I knew people who took pleasure in trolling, and they regret it, and most of them regret it now heavily because of the message that they've put in their viewers' heads, and now can't take back unless they work hard to provide a new message. And that's part of the reason why, because people always ask me, oh, why do you hate Brawl Taunts so much? Or, oh, this and that. And because, and I didn't write Brawl Taunts. I always try to put, emphasis on that. And I'm sure that, Kira even, feels bad about a lot of the jokes that she had in those. But, to hold myself to that too, on like Parody Rangers and the Nintendo collabs, there are a lot of jokes in those cartoons that I made in like my Newgrounds heyday, I guess, whatever you want to put it, that had like not cool content in them, like that were kind of like not inclusive or mean-spirited or whatever, and I regret that too, but I have to live with that. I can't erase that from my history, and all I can do is strive to do better now because my personal values as a creator and as a person have grown and changed a lot since then, and in the last 10 years now, since Parody Rangers was kind of the thing that kind of put myself in the public eye, I guess. That was 10 years ago, and I've learned so much since then. But that has to do with my being a creator, and that's a different kind of perspective that not everybody's going to have on a general kind of level. But I am also a consumer. Anybody and everybody is a consumer. And as far as being a fan goes, as far as being a human being goes, there is, this is what I was implying earlier, I'm going to get into this now, there is nothing that you can do to prevent shitty fandoms from existing. And that is because you can't control how successful something is, how many people are interested in it, and how obnoxious they may or may not be about their interest in said successful thing, no matter what it is. You cannot, and I know that whatever. If any, like I said before, anybody who has half a brain knows that that's how life is. But it bears repeating because how do you deal with it? What are you supposed to do with that then? The only thing that you can do, this is much how it is with when you're picked on. If you're a nerd and you're picked on, if you're a fan of geeky stuff, like another kind of good tie-in here. If you're bullied by people, you can't control what other people do. You can only change how you react. The same, and I know that sounds like a fucking guidance counselor saying that, but it's true, and it's the same thing that applies here. The only thing you can do to deal with that is to accept shitty fandoms, or not even shitty, just fandoms in general, as an inevitability. I know that sounds kind of existentially. Oh, like the only reason we die is because we accept it as an inevitability. Anyway, but yeah, there's accepting that and trying your absolute best to be as objective as possible. So you can make your own personal judgments on something without letting other people, in a way, basically control you. And it's one thing to, just not be interested in something, on your own merits. And I give people complete credit for if they give something a genuine shot, whatever it is, whatever the medium is. and they fairly assess that it's just not for me. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's another thing it's an immature thing to declare something as bad or stupid or worthless or whatever negative connotation based off of nothing other than it annoys you, and even worse, if the people who like it annoy you for whatever reason you justify it as. And sure, maybe that sounds one of the, that's not fair, but I just, that's my outlook on that is I don't think that that's fair, and I hold myself to that. Like I was saying before, yes, I have examples of that too. I'll use an example. Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. I've not seen Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, and when I see it pop up on my dash, and I don't get what the fucking memes are, and a lot of my friends are really big into it, and they tell me, I'm sure it's a great show. I'm absolutely not disputing that, and maybe someday I will watch that. I know I've had people asking me to do a Kirblog on it, but admittedly, when I see that in my face like every other day, and I don't get it because I'm not into it and I don't understand it, yes, it's annoying. But I also try to remind myself, okay, I want to preach what I practice by not letting that dictate, oh God, I'm never going to watch this. I'm never going to get into this. I just hate this because all I associate it with is people annoying me with the whatever about it. Because that's not fair for me to feel that way either. And so I try with, and that's one example, but with anything that fits into that kind of, category for me, I guess, I try to see it from other people's perspective. It's like, well, clearly there's a good reason for why this is beloved by so many people and why people are so passionate about it and why they find it so entertaining. That's important to think of that from the other people's, and I get it. That's not easy for everybody because that's a lot of effort to, give a shit about what other people think and how other people are and about their lives, because typically you're just thinking about yourself, and that's also human and you can't be blamed for that either. The other kind of inevitability that I've had, that I have had to just come to accept is that people of all ages, because some might say it's an immature thing, but I think anybody of any age, or anybody's guilty of doing this sometimes. People go to extremes in their passion and their hatred and their indifference. It's really easy to go overboard with being passionate about something and just, letting it be this massive part of your daily life. It's even easier to hate on something if it really annoys you for whatever reason it annoys you. And it's the most easy to just go, I don't care, because it feels good. It feels good to be a dick about the things that you don't like, even though you shouldn't be a dick about the things you don't like. But I don't know, maybe if we could all just be a little more objective, less off the cuff about our entertainment sometimes, even just a little bit, maybe we can all just fucking get along. That's about all I have to say on that. So, I say this a lot, but really on this one, I'm really curious, what do you all think? So I want to hear your comments anywhere and everything. If this hopefully spreads around, show people this actually. And I don't mean that from even a self-promoting aspect. I actually want to hear people's thoughts on this subject. And if do you agree? Do you not agree? If this, even then, I want to hear different perspectives on this. Give me your own kind of personal experiences. Maybe a few different ones, maybe a positive and a negative one. How do you kind of, what is your overall mentality of, your perception and how you deal with fandoms and your involvement with fandoms? Tell me your thoughts on how that kind of stuff goes. Share some stories with me. I'm very curious about a lot of different, as many different types of perspectives on this one as possible. So I hope that this was interesting and informational and maybe provided some new perspective and made you think a little bit deeper about this stuff. I don't know, hopefully maybe to some extent. But but thanks for listening either way. I didn't know how long this one was going to go on for, but I just hit the record button and said, fuck it, let's just see where it goes. So, I'll be at Anime Expo this weekend. I don't have any panels or anything going on, but I'm just going to be wandering around. So if you see me, come up and say hi. I'll probably be bothering lots of Tales of Zestiria cosplayers, and I'll be just hanging around with general people who are going to be coming in from out of town and just having a good time and stuff, and hopefully not dying in this excruciating summer heat. Oh dear God, please help me. Send ice. But yeah, that's it. So thanks. And also, as usual, if you have future Kirblog topics, leave a suggestion for that if you want. Hit me up on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, all the usual shit. You know the drill by now. Been doing these for 2 years now. Yeah, so that's it. See you all in July, and hope you've had a wonderful month, and look forward to a hopefully lovely summer. And bye.